France gave the world revolutions, fine dining, military genius, and enough historical nonsense to make satire feel unnecessary. Kings were defeated by doorways, presidents escaped from trains in pajamas, and Napoleon was once forced into retreat by hungry rabbits. These are 34 absurd facts proving French history was never short on drama, brilliance, or completely avoidable embarrassment. 1. The French resistance understood that sabotage did not always need explosions. Sometimes all you needed was a powder that made enemy underwear feel possessed. Resistance members reportedly slipped itching powder into German uniforms, laundry supplies, and clothing depots. One common ingredient was finely ground rosehip fibers, which could cause relentless irritation without leaving an obvious trace. Soldiers scratched, lost sleep, struggled to concentrate, and probably began questioning every pair of government-issued trousers. It was not designed to kill anyone. It was designed to make occupying troops permanently furious and deeply uncomfortable. Imagine trying to project terrifying military discipline while clawing at your backside during inspection. The resistance proved that psychological warfare could be cheap, discreet, and astonishingly petty. 2. King Louis XVI had a hobby that would have been charming if his kingdom had not been collapsing around him. He loved making locks, not merely collecting them or ordering servants to build them. Louis had his own workshop at Versailles, where he filed metal, studied mechanisms, and assembled locks with genuine enthusiasm. Unfortunately, France was buried in debt, food prices were soaring, and public anger was turning into revolutionary gasoline. While politicians demanded decisions, the king often preferred the comforting logic of gears, keys, and tumblers. Locks behaved predictably. Angry citizens did not. There is a brutal irony in watching a monarch spend years perfecting devices that keep doors closed, only to end up imprisoned by the people he failed to understand. 3. Cardinal Richelieu terrified nobles, crushed rebellions, manipulated royal politics, and helped transform France into a major European power. Then he went home and became a devoted cat gentleman. Richelieu reportedly kept around 14 cats in his residence, including animals with magnificent names such as Lucifer, Gazette, and Ludovic the Cruel. He allowed them into his private rooms and apparently enjoyed their company far more than he enjoyed most human beings, which is understandable after working in politics. Accounts also claim that his will included money for their continued care after his death. So the ruthless architect of French state power created what was basically a 17th-century feline retirement fund. He trusted very few people, but several fluffy creatures received full access to the cardinal's softer side. 4. When German aircraft began threatening Paris during World War I, French planners considered an extraordinary defense strategy: build another Paris and hope the bombers attacked the wrong one. Outside the real capital, workers began constructing a decoy landscape using wooden buildings, painted streets, canvas factories, fake railway stations, and carefully arranged electric lights. From high above at night, the imitation was supposed to resemble the glow and movement of the genuine city. The entire plan sounds like a theater production commissioned by people with anti-aircraft guns. Only sections were completed before the war ended, so the fake capital never reached its full deceptive glory. Still, France genuinely attempted to protect Paris by creating Paris II, now with fewer residents and significantly more plywood. 5. In 1925, professional con artist Victor Lustig looked at the Eiffel Tower and decided that stealing it was too difficult, so he sold it instead. Pretending to be a French government official, he invited scrap metal dealers to a secret meeting and explained that the tower had become too expensive to maintain. One dealer paid Lustig for the supposed demolition contract and even added a bribe to secure the deal. Lustig disappeared with the money. The victim was so embarrassed that he reportedly avoided contacting police. Seeing an opportunity, Lustig returned to Paris and attempted the scam again with another buyer. He later continued his criminal career in America until counterfeiting finally brought him down. Selling Paris's most famous landmark twice requires criminal talent and absolutely unreasonable confidence. 6. French law contains one romantic possibility that sounds invented by a Gothic novelist. Under exceptional circumstances, a person may marry someone who has already died. The applicant must prove that the deceased clearly intended to marry them before death, and permission must come directly from the President of France. The modern law emerged after the 1959 Malpasset Dam disaster, when a pregnant woman asked to marry her fiancé, who had been killed in the catastrophe. President Charles de Gaulle approved the request, and posthumous marriages became legally recognized. The marriage is treated as having occurred before the death, although it does not automatically create inheritance rights. So in France, even death may not cancel a wedding. It merely adds presidential paperwork and the most uncomfortable reception imaginable. 7. Medieval French courts occasionally prosecuted animals, and one famous legal story involved rats accused of destroying a barley crop. A lawyer named Bartholomew Chassenet was assigned to defend them, which already sounds like the beginning of an extremely strange courtroom comedy. When the rats failed to appear, Chassenet argued that the summons had not given every rat enough notice. Later, he claimed his clients could not safely travel because cats were waiting along the roads to murder them. The court reportedly accepted the danger as a legitimate obstacle and delayed proceedings. The rats still never arrived, possibly because they were rats and not citizens concerned about contempt charges. Chassenet's argument became legendary. In Renaissance France, even agricultural pests could receive creative legal representation and a surprisingly effective excuse. 8. Dueling became so fashionable among French nobles under King Henry IV that aristocrats nearly turned themselves into an endangered species. Contemporary estimates claimed that thousands of noblemen died in private fights between 1589 and 1607. The causes were rarely heroic. Men drew swords over card games, gossip, disrespectful glances, romantic jealousy, and insults that would now produce an angry social media post. Royal bands accomplished very little because noble honor apparently outranked survival. Some families lost several sons to this elegant epidemic of fragile masculinity. The bloodshed slowed only when Cardinal Richelieu began enforcing the law with executions, making it clear that surviving a duel did not mean surviving the government. France needed state intervention because wealthy men could not stop stabbing one another over bad manners. 9. Louis XIV is often described as taking only 2 or 3 full baths in his life, although historians consider that dramatic claim exaggerated. What is certain is that bathing habits at Versailles were very different from modern ones. Louis relied heavily on washing with cloths, changing linen, grooming rituals, and generous amounts of perfume. Physicians sometimes warned that immersion in water could weaken the body or allow disease to enter through the pores. The court therefore perfected the art of smelling expensive rather than necessarily smelling clean. Perfumed gloves, scented powders, flowers, and fragrance became defensive equipment in crowded royal rooms. The Sun King glittered in silk, jewels, and gold, while everyone around him quietly hoped the next open window would provide a favorable breeze. 10. In 1386, the French town of Falaise held a murder trial in which the accused was a pig. The animal had killed a child, and local authorities responded as though they were prosecuting a human criminal. The pig was imprisoned, brought before a court, sentenced, and publicly executed. Accounts even describe it being dressed in human clothing before the punishment, because medieval justice apparently required costumes. Crowds gathered to watch the animal face the scaffold. This was not an isolated incident. Across medieval Europe, pigs, donkeys, rats, and even insects could become defendants in formal legal proceedings. People believed animals existed within a moral and religious order, so wrongdoing required punishment. Justice was served, although the defendant almost certainly understood none of the charges. 11. Before the Louvre became a polished temple of art, parts of it resembled an enormous, poorly managed apartment block. After the French Revolution, the former royal palace contained workshops, storage rooms, government offices, artists' studios, and private living spaces occupied by a chaotic collection of residents. Roofs leaked, walls deteriorated, corridors became cluttered, and respectable museum organization was still more ambition than reality. Artists had long been allowed to live and work inside the complex, while neglected sections attracted people seeking shelter or unofficial business opportunities. Napoleon and later rulers gradually renovated, expanded, and reorganized the building. Today, visitors quietly admire priceless masterpieces in immaculate galleries. 2 centuries earlier, they might have encountered laundry, broken furniture, smoke, noise, and several people who definitely did not purchase admission tickets. 12. Versailles was built to display royal glory, but plumbing clearly lost the competition for attention. The palace did contain chamber pots, commodes, and some private toilet facilities, yet these were nowhere near sufficient for the enormous crowds of courtiers, servants, guards, petitioners, and visitors. During major events, people relieved themselves in stairwells, courtyards, fireplaces, secluded corridors, and behind curtains. Servants emptied containers, but maintaining cleanliness in a palace occupied by thousands was a losing battle. Royal elegance existed beside smells that no amount of perfume could fully defeat. Imagine wearing embroidered silk, powdered hair, diamonds, and shoes with decorative heels, then searching desperately for an unoccupied corner. Versailles was a masterpiece of architecture, politics, and ceremonial humiliation, all wrapped in gold leaf and questionable ventilation. 13. France once charged property owners according to the number of doors and windows in their buildings. Introduced during the Revolutionary era, the tax was based on the appealing government theory that wealthy people owned larger homes with more openings. Predictably, many owners responded by sealing those openings with bricks. Saving money became more important than sunlight, fresh air, or the ability to see what was happening outside. Poorer buildings grew darker, damper, and less ventilated, worsening already miserable urban living conditions. The tax survived through changing governments and remained in place until 1926. Bricked-up window frames can still be spotted on older French buildings, permanent evidence that citizens will redesign an entire house to avoid a bill. The government wanted revenue and accidentally encouraged architecture suitable for depressed vampires. 14. Napoleon Bonaparte defeated coalitions, reorganized nations, and marched armies across Europe. Then a group of rabbits forced him into retreat. After the treaties of Tilsit in 1807, Napoleon's staff arranged a celebratory rabbit hunt and gathered hundreds of animals for the event. Unfortunately, they obtained domesticated rabbits rather than wild ones. When released, the rabbits did not flee from the hunters. They charged toward them, expecting food. Soon, Napoleon was surrounded by an advancing carpet of hungry fur, climbing his clothing and swarming around his carriage. Officers attempted to push the animals away, but numbers favored the rabbits. The emperor eventually escaped by carriage. He had faced artillery without blinking, yet surrendered the field to creatures whose primary military objective was probably lunch. 15. French President Paul Deschanel experienced one of the strangest political journeys in 1920 when he fell from a moving train during the night. Wearing pajamas and no shoes, he landed beside the railway, survived, and wandered until he reached a signalman's cottage. Deschanel introduced himself as the President of France, but the railway worker reasonably assumed that the disheveled stranger was confused, drunk, or both. Eventually, officials confirmed that the pajama-clad man was genuinely the missing head of state. Newspapers seized upon the story, and Deschanel became the target of relentless ridicule. His physical and mental health had already deteriorated under the pressure of office, and he resigned months later. Being president means nothing when your only identification is confidence and unusually official-looking sleepwear. 16. King Charles VIII died because a doorway defeated him on his way to watch tennis. In 1498, the 27-year-old monarch was walking through the Château d'Amboise when he struck his head against a low stone lintel. He continued into the viewing area, spoke with people, and watched part of the match, apparently believing the injury was minor. Then he collapsed. Charles slipped into a coma and died several hours later. He had no surviving male heir, so his death ended the direct Valois line and shifted the French succession. A single piece of inconvenient architecture altered national politics. No assassin, battlefield, plague, or conspiracy was required. France lost a king because he was moving too quickly, and medieval builders had not planned for royal forehead clearance. 17. The arrest of the Knights Templar occurred on Friday, October 13, 1307, creating an irresistible connection with the superstition surrounding Friday the 13th. King Philip IV ordered Templars across France seized in a coordinated operation, accusing them of heresy and other crimes. Many were interrogated and tortured, property was confiscated, and the order was eventually destroyed. However, historians generally doubt that this event actually created the modern fear of Friday the 13th. That connection became popular much later. The arrest date remains perfectly cinematic, but medieval Europeans did not immediately begin hiding indoors whenever the calendar repeated it. Still, Philip's operation was spectacularly ruthless. He eliminated a powerful religious military order while also creating material for conspiracy books, movies, and internet arguments 7 centuries later. 18. King Charles VI suffered severe episodes of mental illness, and during one period he became convinced that his body was made of glass. Physical contact terrified him because he believed a bump could shatter him into pieces. According to contemporary accounts, he reinforced his clothing with iron rods and avoided being touched. Servants had to approach carefully, treating the King of France like an extremely anxious palace window. His condition produced other episodes as well. Charles sometimes forgot his name, failed to recognize his family, denied being king, or ran through royal residences in panic. Yet he remained on the throne for more than 40 years, while rival nobles competed for power around him. History remembers him as Charles the Mad, a nickname that is accurate but not especially sensitive. 19. France spent years building the Maginot Line, a vast network of forts, bunkers, artillery positions, underground barracks, railways, and reinforced defenses along much of its eastern frontier. Technically, the fortifications performed many of their intended functions. The Germans did not simply smash through the strongest sections. Instead, in 1940, their main attack passed through Belgium and the Ardennes, where French commanders believed large armored forces would struggle to advance. The Maginot Line was not completely useless, and it forced Germany to choose another route. The disaster came from the wider strategy built around it. France created an extraordinary front door and then misjudged where the enemy would enter. It was military engineering at its finest, attached to a plan with one extremely expensive blind spot. 20. Gustave Eiffel rewarded himself for designing the Eiffel Tower by placing a private apartment near the top. While ordinary visitors climbed stairs or waited for elevators, Eiffel could relax in a small, furnished space above Paris. The apartment included wallpaper, wooden cabinets, carpets, velvet furniture, scientific equipment, and a piano. It was less a royal palace and more the world's most exclusive engineer's lounge. Eiffel entertained selected guests there, including American inventor Thomas Edison. Wealthy Parisians reportedly offered large sums to rent the room for a night, but Eiffel refused. He had already shared the tower with the public. The tiny penthouse was his. A recreated scene with wax figures of Eiffel and Edison can still be seen today, silently enjoying history's most elaborate private rooftop clubhouse. 21. In 1548, Bordeaux erupted in rebellion over one of history's most consistently dangerous substances. taxed salt. The hated gabelle forced people to purchase salt under government rules and at inflated prices. Since salt was essential for preserving food, avoiding it was not an option. Anger exploded, royal authority collapsed inside the city, and a crown representative was killed. King Henry II answered with overwhelming punishment. Troops entered Bordeaux, rebel leaders were executed, local privileges were stripped away, parliament was suspended, and the city's bells were removed as symbols of humiliation. Royal officials wanted to make an example of Bordeaux, and they succeeded. The tax remained deeply unpopular until the French Revolution abolished it. Never underestimate what people will do when the government interferes with dinner preservation. 22. 18th century French hairstyles stopped behaving like hair and became architectural projects. Elite women built enormous arrangements using wire frames, pads, false hair, powder, grease, feathers, ribbons, jewels, fruit, miniature gardens, and model ships. Some styles rose several feet above the head. Fashion plates and satirical accounts even described tiny cages or birds incorporated into elaborate designs, although later stories probably exaggerated the most ridiculous examples. Women had to crouch inside carriages, tilt their heads through doorways, and avoid candles with the concentration of bomb disposal experts. These creations could take hours to assemble and were not rebuilt daily. French high society looked magnificent, expensive, and constantly at risk of becoming trapped beneath a chandelier. Fashion had officially declared war on ceilings. 23. French fries may not be French, but their exact birthplace remains a delicious international argument. Belgium strongly claims that people near the Meuse River were frying potato strips as early as the 17th century. France points to fried potatoes sold by Parisian street vendors around the time of the Revolution. The popular story that American soldiers discovered them in French-speaking Belgium during World War I is memorable, but the name existed earlier. Some researchers suggest that French described cutting food into thin strips rather than nationality, so Belgium and France continue fighting for ownership while the rest of the world simply keeps eating the evidence. The only certainty is that Americans added larger portions, cheese, chili, and enough sauce to make the original dispute impossible to taste. 24. Victor Hugo possessed a level of self-confidence that could have been classified as national infrastructure. An often repeated story claims he imagined that Paris might one day be renamed Hugo in his honor. Whether he seriously proposed it or merely enjoyed dramatic language, the idea suited his personality perfectly. Hugo surrounded himself with portraits, cultivated the image of a living monument, and spoke about his place in literature with very little unnecessary humility. To be fair, France encouraged him. When he died in 1885, around 2 million people joined the funeral procession, and his body was placed in the Pantheon. He may not have convinced Paris to change its name, but he received something close. A capital city temporarily reorganized around the fact that Victor Hugo had died. 25. Antoine-Augustin Parmentier devoted years to convincing French people that potatoes were not poisonous, diseased, or suitable only for livestock. Since logical explanations were failing, he reportedly chose psychological manipulation. Parmentier planted a potato field and placed guards around it during the day, making the crop appear valuable and possibly forbidden. At night, the guards were instructed to leave or become conveniently inattentive. Nearby residents sneaked into the field, stole the mysterious vegetables, planted them, and discovered that potatoes were both edible and extremely useful. Parts of the story may have been polished by later retellings, but Parmentier genuinely promoted potatoes through dinners, publicity, scientific arguments, and influential supporters. He helped France accept a food by treating it like agricultural contraband. Excellent nutrition, even better marketing. 26. The French army entered World War I wearing highly visible uniforms and quickly discovered that modern weapons strongly favored people who were harder to see. France responded by creating specialized camouflage units staffed by artists, decorators, sculptors, and theater designers. Cubist painters were especially useful because they understood how broken shapes, distorted outlines, and unusual color patterns confused the eye. These teams painted artillery, vehicles, observation posts, and entire installations to mislead enemy troops and aerial photography. The word camouflage comes from the French verb camoufler, meaning to disguise. Other armies adopted similar methods, and camouflage became a permanent part of warfare. Art school finally answered the question every parent had asked. Yes, painting strange geometric patterns could lead to a practical military career. 27. The croissant's family tree begins in Austria, but the modern pastry is more complicated than a simple French theft. Austrian bakers had made crescent-shaped Kipferl for centuries. In the 19th century, Viennese-style bakeries introduced similar pastries to Paris, where French bakers transformed the idea using laminated yeast dough and large quantities of butter. That technique created the flaky croissant recognized today. The popular tale that Marie Antoinette personally brought croissants to France is almost certainly a legend. She had many problems, but importing breakfast pastry was probably not among her major historical achievements. So the croissant has Austrian ancestry and a French reinvention. France did not create the original crescent bread, but it upgraded the recipe so aggressively that everyone forgot to read the pastry's birth certificate. 28. In September 1914, German forces threatened Paris, and France needed to move thousands of soldiers toward the Marne. With railway capacity under pressure, authorities commandeered hundreds of Parisian taxis. Around 600 cabs transported roughly 6,000 troops, usually carrying several soldiers at a time. The taxis drove in convoys, meters still running, because bureaucracy apparently follows armies everywhere. The government later paid the fares. Militarily, the reinforcements represented only a small part of the enormous battle, so the taxis did not single-handedly save France. Their symbolic impact, however, was enormous. Ordinary city vehicles had carried soldiers toward one of the war's decisive confrontations. Paris entered modern mechanized warfare using the same transportation normally employed by late theatergoers and people carrying too many shopping bags. 29. The instrument. English speakers call the French horn is not especially French. Its development is more closely connected with hunting horns from German-speaking and Central European regions. Over time, instrument makers added tubing, valves, and other improvements that transformed the hunting horn into the orchestral instrument used today. Germans call it the Waldhorn, meaning forest horn. French musicians usually call it the cor. English speakers somehow added French and then refused to remove it for centuries. The exact reason remains debated. It may involve early French horn designs, French performers, or simple naming confusion. So the world has a largely German-developed instrument, carrying a French label, imposed mainly by English speakers. International cooperation has achieved stranger things, but rarely with this much brass tubing. 30. In 2011, French school cafeteria rules place strict limits on ketchup and other sauces. The government did not send condiment police to confiscate every bottle, but cafeterias were told that sauces should only accompany dishes for which they were considered appropriate. Ketchup could still appear with certain foods, especially fries, but students were no longer supposed to bury every traditional meal beneath a red sugary lake. Officials argued that children needed to experience French cuisine instead of automatically masking its flavor. Critics saw culinary nationalism and unnecessary government control. Supporters saw civilization defending itself from squeeze bottles. France had reached the point where protecting cultural heritage involved regulating what 12-year-olds could put on lunch. Somewhere, a plate of beef bourguignon finally felt safe again. 31. During the Siege of Paris in 1870 and 1871, food shortages pushed the city into an increasingly desperate menu. Horses disappeared first, Then butchers sold dogs, cats, and rats. Eventually, animals from the Jardin des Plantes Zoo were slaughtered and offered to wealthy customers as exotic cuisine. The elephants Castor and Pollux became the most famous victims, sold for an enormous sum and served in expensive restaurants. Menus advertised antelope, camel, kangaroo, wolf, and elephant dishes, with the polished language of fine dining. Hunger had transformed a zoo into a luxury supermarket. Some animals, including many monkeys and large predators, survived, partly because diners found them too disturbing, dangerous, or unappealing. Parisian cuisine remained elegant even when the available ingredients included nearly everything from a children's picture book. 32. French revolutionaries did not merely overthrow a monarchy. They attempted to redesign the calendar and reorganize the human experience of time. The Republican calendar replaced traditional month names with poetic seasonal terms, such as Thermidor for heat and Brumaire for fog. Each month contained 30 days divided into 3 10-day weeks. This weakened Sunday worship, removed religious saints from the calendar, and produced the magnificent labor arrangement of 1 rest day every 10 days. Workers were not impressed. Revolutionaries also experimented with decimal time, dividing the day into 10 hours, each hour into 100 minutes. Clocks were manufactured, schedules were confused, and ordinary people continued thinking in the old system. Napoleon abandoned the calendar in 1805. France declared war on conventional time, and conventional time won comfortably. 33. Louis Antoine, Duke of Angoulême, is often called Louis XIX because of a reign that supposedly lasted around 20 minutes. During the July Revolution of 1830, his father, King Charles X, signed an abdication. Under strict succession rules, the crown briefly passed to Louis. Charles then pressured his son to abdicate as well so the throne could move to the younger Henry, Duke of Bordeaux. Louis hesitated, argued, and eventually signed. Whether he should count as a fully reigning monarch remains disputed, but the 20-minute story became historical legend. He was king long enough to inherit a national crisis, examine the situation, and immediately unsubscribe. Considering what had happened to previous French monarchs, surrendering the crown before lunch may have been the most intelligent Bourbon decision in decades. 34. France continued using the guillotine far later than most people realize. The country's final execution by guillotine took place on September 10, 1977, when convicted murderer Hamida Djandoubi was executed at Baumettes prison in Marseille. That was the same year Star Wars arrived in cinemas, the Apple II computer went on sale, and people were already listening to music on cassette players. Yet France was still using the execution machine most closely associated with powdered wigs and the Revolution. The death penalty remained legal until 1981, when President François Mitterrand's government abolished it. So the guillotine did not disappear with Napoleon, royal carriages, or 19th century melodrama. It survived into the era of color television, disco, and modern commercial aviation, which feels historically illegal. Now name the most absurd French story we failed to include and make it strong. If your fact cannot compete with a 20-minute king, a glass monarch, or Napoleon losing to rabbits, keep digging. Drop your candidate in the comments and let everyone judge whether it deserves a place in part 2. Like the video if France has officially broken your historical expectations, and subscribe for more history behaving badly.